DPSing on Amber Shaper. In order to do the highest DPS that a Warlock can possibly do on this fight, you're going to want to be on AoE duty. Now, for this fight on Heroic, there will be a lot of living Ambers spawning, and they're going to have a lot of HP, and they're also relatively high priority to be killed. Now, if a Warlock specs into Malnaros Fury, and does the Seed of Corruption tactic, the same one you do on Elegon, just spamming Seed of Corruption to kill the ads, you're going to do a lot of DPS, which will look good on the meters, and is also beneficial DPS for your raid. Now, Affliction, I think, is great for this fight because not only is it able to do very high AoE DPS on the ads to keep them under control, but at the same time you can also be keeping up your dots on Amber Shaper and on the person that's in the Monstrosity, so that whenever they need to be DPS'd, you can quickly throw out a Haunt and Malefic Grass them for some relatively bursty DPS on them to help them get them out. Alright, when the fight starts, pre-pot and DPS like you would normally, throw up a Haunt, Soulburn, Soul Swap, and DPS as is standard with Affliction. When he does his first Amber Scalpel, you know that's the cue to start doing your first round of AoE. Now there's only going to be 4 slimes up at the start, so you don't want to do too much AoE for this particular one. Do a Soulburn Seed of Corruption and a few more Seed of Corruptions. As soon as one's dead, it's not really going to be very optimal to continue AoEing them, particularly because they're going to respawn probably anyway before they are consumed. So go back to DPSing Amber Shaper after that. As soon as the first person goes into the Monstrosity, dot him up with Soulburn Soul Swap and start DPSing him down. Make sure that you're keeping your dots ticking on Amber Shaper during this time. Now, if you are purely interested in meter whoring and you don't care about your raid's progression for whatever reason, maybe it's an easy boss on farm for you, then you should just continue DPSing Amber Shaper and only DPS the constructs when they have the debuff which they get on themselves after they interrupt themselves. But for generally, you want to keep dots on Amber Shaper and be DPSing the construct. Now again, when you do Amber Scalpel, you know a bunch of ads are going to spawn, so that's when you want to Soulburn Seed of Corruption on whoever your current target is, probably Amber Shaper, and then keep spamming those Seed of Corruptions on Amber Shaper himself. That's going to cause mass AoE damage to all targets nearby, including the person in the construct, as well as all the slimes, so you're going to do a ton of damage. Because you have all your dots ticking on Amber Shaper, and because he has mass stacks of Destabilize, your Seed of Corruptions are going to detonate instantly every single time. So you can just spam it on the same target without any worries about the Seed of Corruptions overwriting themselves. Now there is a bug right now, where if you have a Seed of Corruption on a target, and you use Soulburn, it will consume your Soulburn as the Seed of Corruption detonates, which can cause you to accidentally pull your dots off a target if you try and Soul Swap. Now, there's no real way to avoid this other than waiting a second before using Soulburn Soul Swap, waiting for your last Seed of Corruption to detonate. But just bear this in mind when you're doing this fight. You don't want to pull your dots off Amber Shaper. Now, when Amber Shaper gets to 70%, the Amber Monstrosity is going to spawn. You want to Soulburn Soul Swap him as soon as he comes out, put Curse of Elements up, and continue AoEing as and when required. If you're the only AoEer, you're going to be AoEing pretty much full time on this fight. If there's someone else helping you, then maybe you'll have a bit of downtime where you can just DPS. Again, when someone goes in the construct, you want to dot them up. You want to always keep your dots on the Amber Monstrosity. You do this by looking at your shadowed unit frames. Do not bother keeping dots on Amber Shaper in this phase because he doesn't take any damage, or very little. You've got to strike the balance between doing high DPS and facilitating the needs of your raid. Now, DPS is important in this phase because there is a soft enrage in the form of having enough living ambers before you run out, is particularly with the tactic that most guilds use these days. So DPS is important to be maintained high, but when people go in the constructs, they do need to die in a relatively short space of time. So you'll see here that I am focusing down this rogue to make sure that he gets out in time, even though there are quite a large number of oozes up, or there were at the time. So you know you have to balance the needs of your raid. So every time a wave of blobs spawns, AoE them down as quickly as possible, and maintain your dots on all 3 targets, and you'll be doing 200k DPS here. If there are 2 AoEs, you might do a bit less because things are going to die faster. Maybe you'll do 170k. It really depends upon the situation in your raid. Another thing to consider though is when a wave of ads spawns, you Soulburn Seed of Corruption the Monstrosity once, so that puts Corruption on every blood up. Now, you want to make sure that Corruption is always on these via Soulburn Seed of Corruption. However, when you have powerful buffs like Dark Soul up, it is worth recasting Soulburn Seed of Corruption at the start of the Dark Soul and at the end of the Dark Soul, so that you get the hasted corruptions on every target. You're gonna see a massive increase to your DPS if you think about min-maxing your Seed of Corruption Soulburns. Now, once the Amber Monstrosity is getting low, maybe below 30% or so, start paying attention to the timer in the Dark Soul. If your Dark Soul comes off cooldown when the Amber Monstrosity is on about 20%, you're going to want to save it, because you want your Dark Soul to be up as soon as you get into phase 3 or very soon after it for the biggest DPS increase, because you're going to do a very, very large chunk of your DPS on this fight in the last phase, because the Amber Shaper is going to have like 600% damage taken. You're going to see a truckload of DPS. Now, as soon as the Amber Monstrosity dies, put your dots up on the Amber Shaper, get a haunt up. Don't pop any cooldowns or pots until his damage taken debuff disappears, which will be about 5 or 6 seconds after the fight begins. Sorry, after the phase begins. As soon as that buff disappears, pop your potion, refresh your dots, haunts, and just Malefic Grasp like crazy. He's gonna die in maybe 15 to 20 seconds. So with that in mind, you're gonna want to get your Doomguard up before his buff disappears. It's just the same as Windlord preparation. So dots ticking on him, Curse of Elements up, haunt up, Doomguard up, pop your potion, refresh the dots, and just nuke like crazy until he's dead.